Joining me live is the Agriculture Minister, Murray Watt. Murray, this remains a pretty concerning issue. Can you just take us through what exactly is being done at the border?
You're right, Laura. It's a really serious issue, and that's why we're putting in place the strongest ever response that any Australian government has ever done for a biosecurity threat. So really within about 24 hours, we ramped up the first measures, 24 hours of it getting to Bali. We've now got extra biosecurity officers at airports. We've got extra detector dogs at airports. Every single plane that comes in from Indonesia is getting played a specific message about foot and mouth disease, the risk and what people can do about it to fix it. We're now screening every mail item that comes in from Indonesia and China, being high-risk countries, to pick up meat products, because of course for all the focus that there has been about Bali travellers, the biggest risk of this coming into the country is actually importation of meat products that have the virus in it.
So it's actually trade being the biggest risk rather than travellers?
Absolutely. The biggest risk of this getting in the country is by someone, whether innocently or maliciously, sending in some kind of meat product that contains live viral fragments. You might remember last week I made public that we had detected some viral fragments in meat products, but they were dead virus, so they weren't contagious, if you like. And we're doing that through the routine surveillance measures that we undertake. So a lot of the things that we do aren't necessarily seen. There are both overt and covert measures in place. I know that there was some reporting over the weekend about travellers not seeing anything happen, and I was concerned about that. So I spent the weekend working with my department about that, and what we found when we looked at the data was that on Saturday alone, just at Melbourne International Airport, about 3,700 passengers were screened or questioned or searched. There was some kind of intervention with them. So the reason we've had some travellers coming through and not seeing anything is because they've deemed to be a low risk. We're risk profiling every single passenger.
How are you doing that?
So what we do is that the biosecurity officers back of house assess someone's risk level, that they might be a risk of bringing a disease or a contaminated product into the country. They do that by looking at people's travel history, at their past biosecurity issues. If you've not declared before and been busted, then you're probably going to be asked this time around. So we're risk profiling every single passenger that comes in from Indonesia, and then those who are deemed to be a risk, they're the ones that we're focusing the effort on. So the passengers who came through the airport and said they hadn't seen anything, well, for starters, they'd heard that audio message on the plane, they'd seen the signs advising of risk, they'd received flyers, but we didn't bother, frankly, looking at those passengers because they're a low risk. What we need to do is target our resources at the highest risk passengers, the highest risk mail products, because that's how we'll keep Australia foot and mouth disease free.
But how do you do that risk profile? I'm just thinking of passengers coming back from Bali. You go to somewhere like Ubud in Bali, which is closely linked to the regional area. I mean, are you looking at people? Have they got a good tan? Do you think they've been on holidays in Ubud? How are you actually doing that?
Well, I'm not obviously going to reveal every operational reason about how we can pick someone up, but we're looking at
Is it controversial?
Well, no. It's more looking at their movements, both in the past and currently, where they've been in the past, whether they've previously declared that they've been on farms or had contact with livestock. As I say, if they've got a poor biosecurity history in the past, then they're likely to be picked up as well. I actually got the department to have a look at what had happened with some of those individual passengers who said that they hadn't seen anything. They were deemed to be low risk, so they were risk profiled along with everyone else and deemed to be low risk.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I got a message from a viewer this morning. His name's Charles. He came through Melbourne Airport. He said there was no sanitiser floor mats at Melbourne Airport when I came through this morning, returning from Indonesia. I didn't see any. I wasn't directed to any. ABF staff did not ask me any questions re my footwear. And his view was it would be easy to give a false declaration and enter with dirty shoes. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that Charles is probably a very low-risk passenger, and good on Charles for doing the right thing. But I could equally point you to 3,700 passengers who came into Melbourne just on Saturday alone in the morning peak who actually were questioned or were screened or did have their luggage looked at.
Would it be just better, though, to have everyone walk through these sanitiser footpads?
That is what will be happening over the next couple of days.
Right.
So basically,
you're ramping that up already?
Yep, absolutely. So last Wednesday, I announced that we would be rolling out sanitised foot mats across every international airport in Australia that receives flights from Indonesia. That's something that no Australian government has ever done before. Almost all the international airports in Australia have now received the mats. They're being tested and trialled. And what I'm told is that either today or tomorrow, we'll start seeing them in place for passengers to walk over. The other thing that we did on Friday we announced that the Federal Director of Biosecurity had declared what are called biosecurity response zones in international airports. And the importance of that is it means that our biosecurity officers can direct passengers to walk over footmats or do other things that currently they can only request passengers to do. And again, that's something that's never been done in Australian history. Yeah. So we're charting new ground here. We're doing things that the last government never did, even though they had the power to do so. You know, we've had other outbreaks in other countries in recent years, and whether it be David Littleproud or Barnaby Joyce or Bridget McKenzie, who were agriculture ministers then, they never rolled out footmats. They never used these biosecurity response zones. So we're taking this very seriously and doing things that have never been done before.
What about footwear that are in suitcases? I mean, these are the questions we all get here.
Sure.
So, I mean, you might not be wearing your shoes on a plane that you were on holidays with.
Exactly. So what that again comes back to the risk profiling thing. So that if you're a passenger who, for one of the reasons we've got underway, is deemed to be a risk, then you will have your luggage searched. You will have your shoes taken off you and cleaned. We already have people looking at shoes when people bring them in to take them away for cleaning. One of the other really pleasing things, Laura, over the weekend was that not only are we seeing more passengers searched now, but we're getting much better compliance from passengers. So the number of passengers who were busted, if you like, trying to bring in a product that was an FMD risk fell a lot over the last week. The number of passengers coming in with contaminated shoes fell a lot. And that gives me some confidence that people are hearing the message, that they've got to take it seriously. I saw all those passengers who were reported over the weekend had done the right thing. They'd cleaned their shoes, and that's what we need people to do.
Okay, let's talk about where the threshold is for actually closing the border and what closing the border means. What would it take? What are you looking at? Where would it need to get to in Indonesia for you to pull that trigger?
Yeah, well, unlike the opposition, which of course has some people saying we should close the borders and some people saying we shouldn't, we've had a consistent position about this day one, and it's a consistent position with industry. All of the farm groups also agree that we shouldn't be closing our borders and that response is over the top compared to the risk in place at the moment. So, you know, we're working collectively with industry. It'd be nice to see the opposition do that rather than play politics. But in terms of the threshold, the advice to me from our biosecurity experts is that we would only consider closing the borders to Indonesia if we completely lost confidence that they were doing anything to manage the outbreak. And that is not the case. Even when I was in Indonesia a bit over a week ago, I learned that they'd reassigned responsibility for the management of the outbreak to their disaster management agency. That was the agency that brought COVID under control in Indonesia some time ago. They're now rolling out vaccines. I saw footage on Sky, I think it was over the weekend, of cattle being vaccinated in Indonesia.
Of course it was on Sky.
Of course it was on Sky.
Do you have a number in mind?
We don't.
If it gets to a certain number of cattle being affected.
It's not so much about that because, you know, the reality is that the number of infected livestock is going to continue to go up a little for a while in Indonesia before they bring it under control. But pleasingly, they're already at a point where more livestock have been vaccinated than those who are infected. So they do seem to be getting ahead of it. They've put in place already movement restrictions. So they've got red, orange and green zones to regulate where animals can be moved around and where they can't. They're placing a particular effort in Bali because they recognise that's a risk. So we think that they are taking it seriously, and it would only be if that changed that we'd consider border closures.
Does closing the border mean closing the border for travellers, or would it mean trade as well?
It potentially could involve trade because this is the thing is that, as I said, the biggest risk of this coming in is actually the importation of meat products. So you could actually seal off the border for travellers, and that wouldn't deal with the major risk that we have, which is products coming in. You know, it potentially could include trade, but one of the reasons that industry leaders overwhelmingly support what we're saying about border closures is because this would have a massive impact on our trade relationship with Indonesia.
Are you learning from Labor's lessons of the past?
Look, I have had it said to me that if we were to close the borders with Indonesia, that would...
you did with live meat.
I've had it said to me that if we were to close the borders now, that would be the biggest blow to our relationship with Indonesia since live cattle exports were banned. And I seem to remember members of the National Party, you know, campaigning about that for 10 years. Now they're the people calling for border closures.
Murray Watt, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Laura.